Good evening. Is it evening, afternoon? When does evening technically start? I don't know. Hello. I am delighted to be here today with you all, but especially with these three incredible people. I'm going to give a very brief introduction of them, and then we'll start with some questions. And then we'll have a little bit of time left over for questions from the audience if you happen to have them. Sylvia Waters currently leads the Ailey Legacy Residency, a lecture, technique, and repertory program for college-level students that looks definitively into the history and creative heritage of Alvin Ailey. This year, with archivist Dominique Singer, she premiered Portrait of Ailey, a new 8-part documentary series presented on PBS Learning Media. From 1991 to 2019, Masazumi Chaya served as Associate Artistic Director of the company. Ronni Favors is currently Rehearsal Director of the company. Ms. Jamison was unable to join us today, but if you want to hear her reflect on her time with Ailey, there's a wonderful conversation in the catalog. So let's start with how you came to dance with the Ailey Company. And did you meet Mr. Ailey, and what was he like? And I'm also curious, I do want you to start, Ms. Waters. I'm also curious about how your roles have changed over the years. So with that, I will hand it to you.
Do we have time is the question. Well, my first sighting of Alvin Ailey, and I do believe in Kismet, was on 57th Street between Park and Lexington Avenue. And I was with my best friend, we were 14 years old, exploring Midtown. And along came this man, this gentleman, this guy, very handsome, in a pea coat and a watch cap. And we looked at him and said, my goodness, who is that? And he looked at us and smiled. We smiled back, and it was just one of those very un-New York smiles. Nothing lascivious about it at all. And when he passed, we turned around and looked, and he turned around and looked, and we were just all giggles for the rest of the day. And 2 weeks later, when I went to my class at the new dance group, and I was sitting there waiting for class to start, and he walked. And he said, hi, like he knew me, and I said, hi. And it turned out he was a substitute teacher for my class, which would have been taught by Charles Blackwell. And I had no idea that it was Horton technique. It took me many years to reflect back on that was actually my first Lester Horton class, as he took my hips, and I was very skinny, and showed me how to do a figure 8. And he paid a lot of attention to me. And then after that, I began to see him perform with companies of Donald McHale. And it was actually when I decided that's what I want to do. After that, I would run into Alvin a lot at the YMHA, at performances. I saw the first Blues Suite, and I saw the first Revelations. And then I would see him seeing other performances. Some of them I was in with Hava Kahav, dancing with Dudley Williams and Mabel Robinson and all these wonderful dancers. And Alvin would say, well, what are you doing this summer? By that time, I was at Juilliard. And I said, well, I'm going to summer school. He said, oh, great, that's a good idea. Then I heard he was doing something in New Jersey, performing. I said, oh, Sylvia, keep your mouth shut. And that happened 2 or 3 years for the next, for the next 10 years. Until finally, when I returned to New York and I ran into Alvin, and he said, Sylvia, what are you doing? I said, nothing. And that's when I joined the company in 1968. That's the abridged version. Okay.
And can you tell us what happened in 1974?
In 1974, well, it was, the tail end of 74, and we were having our contract talks, and he said he had started the second company, and they had done a television program, and Ailey celebrates Ellington, preparation for the bicentennial that he was planning for 1976. So as we talked, he said, well, you know, I need a director for this company. I said, yeah. And at that point, I'd become a parent, and he was absolutely, you know, so generous and understanding about that. He said, I think you should be the director of this company. I said, really? He said, but I don't want you to stop dancing. I said, well, who am I going to dance with? He said, well, think about it. So I did. I thought about it for about 12 hours that evening, and the next day I decided, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I continued to dance, but I had been given, I realized, this gift, a way to make a transition. I thought I was going to go into acting. But as I took over this second company, this group of young hopefuls, very, very gifted and talented dancers that Alvin wanted to train to have a complete training in all the disciplines to prepare them for what life in the professional world would be and what it was to be in a company. So it was on that I began to build and commission works, and we were really a company that, we weren't a company, we were a workshop, really, at the outset. And we performed lots of community services in schools and hospitals and audiences that would not be able to come to performances. We went to them. And our first performance was at Leesburg State Prison in New Jersey in practice clothes. The girls wore skirts, the guys wore tank tops and pants, no shoes. And there we were with this audience of black and brown people primarily. And we could have been a city center the way they responded. It was amazing. And with bravos and all. And we would do a question and answer after that. I mean, it was a harrowing, daunting experience, you know, being checked in and checked out. But to realize that you were reaching an audience of young, incarcerated men, and so many of them. And we did these performances for hospital audiences. And we did them, like I said, for seniors and for people who were challenged, who could not get to performances. And we did a lot of them throughout New York State, all except Attica. I refused to go there. The governor wouldn't go, I wasn't going either. So that's how we started. And Alvin gave us a chance to do our own little Ellington festival, where I commissioned the dancers and the designers for the pieces, and he even presented those pieces at the State Theater. And Ronni was in the cast of a Diane McIntyre piece, a gem of a duet. When there's nobody looking, I kept trying to bring that back. And then it was thought, well, maybe we could actually tour and pick up the overflow bookings that the first company could no longer do because the company was growing, too big, too expensive. So we started doing the performances in the colleges and the universities and all the little havens throughout America. And that's kind of
how long did
started.
you do that?
38 years. Thank you. Nice long time to have a job. Great. In dance.
Thank you, Ms. Waters. Chaya?
Hello. So my story is a little bit longer than Sylvia's because I came to United States in 1969. Then I wanted to be a Broadway show dancer. So right away, I started taking class and Jojo Smith and also at this dance class on 8th Avenue. What's his name? I forgot about this teacher. So I was, Luigi, yeah. So anyway, so I was doing that, and then somebody said they're looking for the dancers. Why don't you go to audition? So okay, I don't have a job, so I'm gonna go there. So I went to this audition. Then every dancer wearing a ballet outfit. Ladies are point shoes and pink ties and black ties. Guys at the white shirts, black ties, and the ballet slipper. And then I'm in the jazz pants with the barefoot and tank top halfway open. So I thought, I'm gonna go home. But then I haven't taken a ballet class a long time. Maybe I should take a class. So I took a class with the barefoot, and then this company hired me. So I had a great time with this company, and small company, but we travel a lot. And then during that time, when we come back to New York, and there is a Bob Fosse is looking for dancers. So I went to the audition. So Liza Z, this program, and then he liked me, so we learned even trio doing all those movements. And then I went back to the Richard saying, Bob Fosse wanted to do this job. He said, no, you cannot do it because our New York season's coming. So I told them, then they call Richard, which is a director. And then Richard said, no, you cannot have Chaya yet. And then, so I was still rehearsing, and then Bob Fosse again called. This time the assistant person called, and then we're going to start the year, 1 week later, so can I have a Chaya? The company said no. So continue, I did, and I did a concert for that New York season. So then we have a laid off, and then my friend came from Japan, his name is Oka, and he took an audition at the Ailey company, and they said they liked him, so bring somebody talk about his own contract. So okay, I don't speak really English, just like now, but I go there and they're talking to Ivy Clark, who's at the general managers, and we wanted Oka to sign this contract, and then Ivy asked me, what do you do? I said, I'm dancer too. I said, oh, what's your name? I said, my name is Masazumi Chaya. And she go to, I know Matthew heard this story, but they opened the drawer, and the New York Times he put up, and the Clyburn mentioned my name in that New York Times because he saw the concert, which is Richard England's company I danced. And then Ivy said, why don't you come tomorrow's call back with Oka? So I came back, and then we did a audition, and Alvin hired me. Yeah, I saw that the Ailey company, and first time it's Broadway theater, they're doing a dance.
At the
Anta Theater. And of course, I didn't have any money, so I'm waiting for that intermission, which that time everybody comes out. And they're talking, I slowly with them to go inside, and they watched, and the Ailey company. So I loved the company, but I have no idea what this company is. That way to start.
Good. Chaya, how did your role change from being a dancer to an artistic director?
First year, and just learning everything, and the fourth year, we lost a ballet ballet master, and a ballet mistress. So Alvin didn't have anybody to rehearse. So Alvin asked Dudley, Miss Jameson, Mari Kajiwara, and me to do something. And which is, I'm just fourth year, and I was so scared to give a note to Clive Thompson, say, Alvin said, your arms is wrong, and I had to run away because so scared. But that time, I don't know, he saw something I can, because I was able to count a lot. And also, I hung around from at the beginning to end. At 7 o'clock, I stay in the studio, I just watching rehearsal, and then watching what they're doing, even I was not called. And I guess he wanted to try And then later on, that of course, we had Mary Barnett came, and after that, I didn't do any, and then continue be a dancer. And then one day I told Alvin, about time to me to stop now. I think I had a great time here. And Alvin said, no, you cannot go yet. I said, no, I have to go. I said, no, you cannot go. And then he said, okay, just think about it. Then what happened is that year, when our dancers, 30 dancers, but the only company hired 20 dancers. And then one dancer missing, but he saved my salary for that, so that he doesn't have to negotiate with the board member. We have to have a new budget, but he made a space for me. So I become an assistant to rehearsal director job. So then I was doing that, and then one day Alvin called me to, this is a meeting, come, and then I go to this meeting, and then Miss Barnett came. She was at the rehearsal director. She said, no, Alvin, he doesn't need to be here. And then Alvin said, I just invited him. No, Alvin, we have a timeline. We have to finish this conversation. So, Chaya, you can go. And getting up, Alvin said, sit. So I invited. So what happened, that meeting was making a city center programming. So basically, Alvin said, oh, fast music is good, but its costume is white. We cannot put the cry next to, we had to bring something different, duet. They're talking about this. And they're making a whole season's programming. And I was just sitting at it's interesting. So that was I didn't even know I'm going to be later on that I'm doing that job. But as that was started out, Mr. Ailey was invited from that.
Wow. Yeah. What a story. Ronni, tell us.
Hi, everyone. Hi. My story started in Iowa City, Iowa, which is my hometown. And I was studying to be a ballet dancer. I met this woman who really changed my life. And I wanted to be a ballet dancer just more than I wanted to even breathe. My mother was a little worried about my wanting to be a ballet dancer and how receptive how receptive the ballet world would be to me. So she was always trying to introduce me to other things. And at the time when I was studying ballet, I was like a kid, and modern dance was, it was like the kind where you imagine that you're a sun, or you're a flower blooming in the sun, and that just wasn't interesting to me. I liked the specificity and the rigor and the intellectual challenge of making your body be in a certain place at a certain time. That just really appealed to me, so I wasn't into modern dance at all. But my mother kept, so fast forward, and now I'm in high school, and we had a new performing arts center, Hampshire Performing Arts Center, that just opened up. And National Ballet of Canada was Rudolph Nureyev was coming, and also Alvin Ailey. And so I was like, National Ballet of Canada. My mother's like, Alvin Ailey. And so she's just yapping, Alvin Ailey, Alvin Ailey, Alvin Ailey, Alvin. So she drags me to see this performance, and I'll tell you a secret. I didn't like it. So what happens is, we are a repertory company. And so that means, you kind of get what you get, And the performance, this program I saw that night was, just didn't really hit me. Only two people in the world know what that program is. I told Judy and I told Chaya. When I told them, they're like, oh, yeah, that one, yeah. But at any rate, so I was like more determined to be a ballet dancer. And just let me say that the program I saw, Revelations, was not on that program. Okay, so just to set that stage. So I went on, and I went to Interlochen, and I got a wonderful scholarship to go back there. And somehow, my parents were separated at the time, so my father was living in D.C., so I went back to spend the rest of the summer with my father before I returned back to Iowa to finish out my senior year of high school. And I don't know how he convinced me to go see the Ailey Company again, but they were performing at Wolf Trap, and he wanted me to go see them. And my father and I were kind of at loggerheads all the time, so really I have no idea how this happened, but somehow we got to Wolf Trap, and I saw the Ailey Company. And this time I saw Donald McHale's Rainbow Around My Shoulders, and I said, oh. And then they closed with Revelations, and I said, oh. there went the point shoes. And from there on in, I was going to be in the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. That's all I wanted to do. So I finished out the rest of my senior year in high school. I had a hard time, Iowa City is a college town, which means the population is very transient. So people are always in and out. And so the teachers that I had been studying with, they moved to someplace else. So I didn't even have any classes my whole senior year of high school. I just kind of tried to remember stuff and train myself when I had time. So I really felt like I was at a deficit. I went to Interlochen the following summer, had a horrible time there, but I was really determined I was going to come to New York. And somehow I talked my parents into this. I have no idea because to me, I was always coming to New York. My mother tells me that we had many thousands of heated arguments about whether I was going to go to college or come to New York. I just knew I was coming to New York. So we made a deal that I would come to New York for a year. And if it looked like I could make it work, I didn't have to be working, but if it just looked like, there seemed like there could be a future for me, then I could stay, and if not, then I'd have to go back to college somewhere and study something. So I had a lot of, I had a lot of motivation to really make this dance thing work, because I loved it, and there was really nothing else I wanted to do. So I started at the Ailey School and came to New York, and we found this place for me to live. It's like this place called St. Mary's Residence for Young Women on East 72nd Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues, run by these wild Hungarian nuns. And at that time, the Ailey School was on 59th Street between 2nd and 3rd. It was this mecca of dance, and it's like, the Stevie Wonder song, New York, just like I imagined it. Skyscrapers and everything, right? So that's how it felt coming into the Ailey. Like you could feel the block rocking as you got closer to the Ailey School. It was this old church, and really the place was vibrating, and people were in and out, and all the creme de la creme. The Wiz had just opened, because I got there in 1974, right? So right before Sylvia made her transition to her new life. But the Wiz had just opened on Broadway, and models and actors, and like the Ailey School was the place to be. And so you're just walking in, and I'm this kid from Iowa City. And it was just everything I imagined and more. And so I first met Alvin at the deli. So if you go out of the school, you could go to the right, and that was the popular deli. And if you could go to the left, there was this other one that not many people knew about, and it was quieter. And so I went to the one on the left. And there's Alvin Ailey. And but I'm cool. I'm 18 years old. I've been around, so I just kind of nodded at him. And so this happened about 3 or 4 days. And that's the thing about Alvin, is that his interest in people, was just evident all the time. It didn't matter who you were, where you were from, but if you looked interesting or different, he was interested in you. And so I definitely did not look like a New York kid. I was still in my Iowa, like overalls, and I probably had some, alfalfa sticking out of my afro or something, but I just didn't look like a regular New York kid. So he struck up a conversation with me, and we just started talking, and then every, few times we'd meet at the deli, and then after about 3 or 4 times he said, well, I'm Alvin Ailey, and I said, yes, I know. I know who you are. Actually, I study at your school. Oh, you're a dancer. Yes. So then, I got a scholarship at the school finally, and I would do work-study programs. So I would sign people in the desk so we'd see each other as he was coming in and out of the building. And, it's always very natural, very engaging, very inviting. And he'd come up to the office and let's talk. I was like, no. I said yes, but I was never going to do that, because it's Alvin Ailey. And so I was able to study there for a year, and towards the end of towards the summertime in 1975, Sylvia Waters was giving a workshop on Wade in the Water. And only invited students can come, because I wasn't allowed to take the audition for Ailey, the repertory ensemble, because my scholarship advisor, Dolores Brown, didn't think that I was advanced enough. She said, you only have one opportunity to make a first impression. So you need to just wait until you're a little more seasoned, a little more, trained and polished, and then we can talk about it for next year. So then the summertime, I got invited to do this workshop. I was going to be in there, and it was I just ate it alive. I just was like white on rice with Sylvia. It's like whatever she did, I was just in her face, whatever, and had an amazing time. And it was, learning wade in the water. It was like, oh my goodness. And then from this person who is just, so knowledgeable and so wise and so artistic, like everything I ever wanted to be was embodied in Sylvia. She spoke French. She's fluent in French. The fashion maven, just everything about her was what I wanted to be. So at the end of the summer, I was invited to become an apprentice with the repertory ensemble. So I started coming to rehearsals, and that was just incredible. And, you just learn everything. And we were starting to work on some of the repertory for the Ailey Celebrates Ellington Festival. And then in about February of 1976, so I'd been an apprentice for about 4 or 5 months, and one day, Sylvia said, I have an announcement to make. This woman, one of the dancers in the company, had a family emergency and had to leave the company. And so she had to go back home to whatever state she was from. And so now Ronni will be part of the company. And I remember, because I was looking at the news, I had a newspaper. I was on the floor reading the newspaper. And I was so in shock that my hand just kept moving. And I was just like blinking. And so Sylvia, was like, don't you care about being this? I was like, yes, I So I got to be in the company. And I got to be part of the Ailey Celebrates Ellington Festival, which was unbelievable. We had 5 pieces choreographed for us by Diane McIntyre, and Gus Solomons Jr. had done a piece for us, and other people that I'm not going to try to pull up out of my elderly brain at the moment. But we had this amazing opportunity to be part of this grand festival, and to be, like 19 years old and dancing on the stage at Lincoln Center. I was like, I'm from Iowa City, Iowa. This doesn't make any sense. And yet here I am. And so after that, I was actually part of that first tour that we did with the colleges and stuff. We just started that in 1976. We continued to do all those, the different outreach programs. And actually that was very, very impactful for me, dancing in the prisons in particular, because I always had this idea, or I should say a question. I know I love to dance, and I know it feels great, and it answers a lot of my personal questions, but what am I doing? What am I giving? How is this thing that is so much about me and how I feel and how I experience life, what is it doing for other people? And I guess I'd been raised, my mother was a anarchist, for lack of a better word. She was an activist, let's put it that way. So there was always a lot about, growing up in the 60s and, the civil rights movement and and the Vietnam War movement and and so she was always very engaged in all of these activist movements, and here I am dancing. And so I always had this feeling like, what am I, okay, I love it, but what's the deeper meaning? And so going to the prisons and having that kind of a reaction really answered that question for me, that, art is very powerful and it is necessary. And to see people, and I would just wonder, like, how often do they get to even come out and see something else? And so it created this need in me to be able to do something with my life, with my dancing at some point, that would be able to engage with people that really had nothing to do about the performing aspect of it, but how my life and the love of dance could affect somebody in a different way. And so I had the great opportunity to become part of the Ailey Camp program when it started in 1989 in Kansas City, which is a program for middle school kids from underserved communities that is set up to help them develop critical and analytical thinking skills, develop self-esteem, good decision-making skills. It's really using dance as the vehicle, and all of the attributes that we learn through dance, delaying your gratification, learning how to be self-motivated, how to work in groups, how to, listen to music and open up and be vulnerable. All those things that, you need to learn as a life skill. So I was really able to parlay all of this into that program and be a part of that, which really fed my life in such a way that I'm forever grateful to, you know, all the people that touched me along the way, but especially to Alvin Ailey, who just had this love of humanity and was always looking for different ways in order to be able to engage people, to bring them in so that they could, you know, see themselves in a new way, see other people in a new way, to be able to enjoy each other while we're on earth together.
I mean, I've had the pleasure of being in conversation with these people to develop this show. You can just see how how just rich and generous and thoughtful they are, and their stories are amazing. I do want to take a little bit of a moment and be a little selfish, actually, and talk about the show a little bit. When I was making it, I kept coming up with words to understand him in relationship to what was being unfolded. And I came up with threshold, I came up with precipice, I came up with like a portal even to understand what he did and his values. I wonder what your word might be and to describe him. And I also wonder what it was like for you to see his notebooks, to see those photographs, to see the video surround where you can hear him and see him. And you all know this material, but this is a very different context for it. So yeah, I would love to just hear your thoughts and your word.
Well, seeing Alvin in this context, the first night I saw the exhibit, I was astounded, moved. I mean, the emotional impact was very, very, very heavy, very strong. And it was, I just didn't know where to start. So I just stayed right in the middle watching the film and hearing his voice and identifying the pieces and the dancers in it, those who are still with us and those who are no longer with us. And I was just mesmerized. And as I think I walked around with Chaya, and I'd recognize people, but I couldn't remember their names. I was just so taken with it all. It was a very, very moving, immersive experience. I mean, I looked at the notes as though I'd never seen them before, but I had seen them many times. I had discovered those notes in his apartment. And about those notebooks, when we had what we called our contract talks, Alvin always had these school books, and he would be sitting behind his desk or wherever we were. One time it was in North Africa, in Sfax, I remember, the end of the tour. And he would just be writing in this notebook, and you're wondering, well, what is he writing about me? My God, you know. And we talk about roles that one should learn, what one should work on, those sorts of things. I mean, he was a great listener, a fantastic listener. You could just pour out your whole life to him, and he'd listen. He didn't cut you off or at all. So when we discovered these notebooks, it was Chaya and I said, oh my gosh. And I turned the pages very slowly, not knowing what I might discover on each page. And I think there were about, 14 or 15 of them. And as his executor, the designation in the will was that the ephemera and things that had to do with the company should go to Alan Gray. So I was really on the fence about these notebooks. Were they journals? Were they notes about ballets that he was choreographing? What were they? It was hard to categorize them. And Alan wanted to open a museum in Kansas City dedicated to Alvin Gray, that is. And so I was, those were the last things I gave up. In fact, when Alvin was in the hospital, one of the last visits, he said, I made a will. I said, oh, really? And it was like, with your parents telling you what you're supposed to do and you change the subject. It was kind of like that. And I said, well, yeah, that's a good idea. Everybody should make a will. And then he said, and I read the Balanchine book. And, he left a ballet to each one of his favorite ballerinas. I said, oh, he did? Oh, my goodness. Again, I changed the subject. And so when I found these books, among other things, I had to make a decision. And fortunately, the archives has copies of these notes. So getting back to your original question, how has this exhibit impacted me? Well, I have until February 9th, I think, to come back again and again and again and absorb it. It's a lot to take in. Some of it I knew, but it's the way it's made accessible to everyone, to audiences, and his generosity of spirit. I mean, Alvin, like we keep saying, loved people. We would tour in places where, for instance, in Brazil, where there were the samba dancers who couldn't afford the tickets to this opera house. So Alvin opened the door to them to see these performances, and the management was furious. But he opened the door to them to see the performances because he wanted the people, not just the elites, not just the politicians, and to see the performances. He wanted the people of that city, that particular city or country. And he did this in many cities on State Department tours in Africa. He let people in to see those performances. So it's a huge, big surround of a heart, an embrace of the world, an embrace of humanity that he was very interested in. It always amazed me how people responded to the performances, even in the Arabic countries where all you saw were eyes. And you realize when the lights came up, they were all wearing veils, and why that was. But they all understood. It was something very, very deep. He communicated with this language of dance, this universal language of dance. They didn't need to know what the words meant. They knew what the words meant. They got it. And that always impressed me about him.
Do you have a word, Chaya?
Yes. So one day he asked me let's go to see this new space, 211 West 61st Street. Okay. Yeah. So he took me to this space. We just put sticks, and then he would walk around and say, oh, this is going to be first studio, second studio. And then this is the office space. That was what he was doing. Then after that is, okay, Chaya, let's go home. And then we go out. This was next to that building was a project, is it called? Yeah. So he go to the office of project, and then he said he introduced himself, and then told this lady, if you are any young dancers, young children want to take a class, come, I'm invite you. Right away he said that, and I was like, oh my God, I even that just didn't finish this building, but he was just like that. And then we go home. And then that time we had to ready to move, so they start cleaning office. And I discovered this side of a green notebook. And then, what are you going to do this? And I heard, we have enough, so we're going to throw out. Can I keep it? And I said, yeah, Chaya, you can keep it. And I was looking for inside was a payroll. said, Dudley Williams $30, and so and so $20, so and so, and they come to Alvin Ailey, zero. Every page I opened, he was zero. He was not getting any money, but he was giving to all the dancers for that. That notebook I found. And I kept it.
Musicians.
And the musicians too, yeah. So I kept it for a while, and then I think I gave it to the archive for that notebook. Because, I didn't want to give away it, but that should be sharing, so. Yeah, that was Alvin.
Thank you, Chaya.
Can I have 2 words?
Yeah, you can have as many as you want. You can make a sentence.
Oh no, that's too much. Okay. My 2 words are generosity, and Sylvia already said that. I was a little bit miffed when he brought that up because I've been hanging on to that word. But anyway, generosity and curiosity. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, Alvin just had this curiosity about the world and the generosity to bring everyone into it. And I was talking earlier today with some of one of the other dancers, and just talking about the genius that he had, to create this thing that we still can't quite find the right word to define it, right? It's so many things. And not only the ability to create it and see it, but then to get the rest of us excited about it, and to be able to inspire other people to want to go on this journey with him. And I'm just thinking about generosity because I'm thinking about, like along with those when he was at 211 or setting that up, along with creating classes if necessary for the kids in the projects, he was always looking for who's the audience that hasn't been able to experience dance yet. So he created dance classes for people with limited vision. He was looking for always opportunities. When we were at Ailey Camp, so this was 1989, so this was in August of 1989. Alvin died in December of 1989. But he came out to the final performance of the first, the inaugural Ailey Camp. And the kids were just astounded, that they've been hearing about Alvin Ailey and we've been, and all this stuff, and that somebody cared enough about them, to come see them and come see them dance. And so at the end of the performance, he came up to the stage and they just rushed him, crying and hugging and, they just knowing that this person cared about them, that they didn't know, and they knew that he didn't really know them, but somehow his heart was big enough to care to create this incredible program that really changed their lives. Everybody at Ailey Camp has a life-changing experience. And so to meet the person that put this into motion was just beyond, and to get like a 12 to 14-year-old to get excited and happy and affectionate about anything, anybody that has a middle schooler, you know what I'm saying. So he was so touched by that the next day, because he was quite ill at that time. He wasn't at death's door, but death was in the neighborhood. It was really clearly towards the end of his life. And so he came, and a friend that lived there was actually going to take him on vacation to the Bahamas to just kind of get away and have some relaxing time and just be able to, nurture himself. But he insisted on coming to Ailey Camp that next morning so that he could interact with the kids. And so he spent the whole morning, just in the cafeteria with them, talking, answering questions, hugging their teddy bears, all this. And he had to be dragged out to get on a plane to go relax somewhere because he wanted to stay with the kids, So that kind of generosity and that kind of curiosity, and that was the last time I saw him, and to see him like kind of going backwards, being pulled backwards out of Ailey Camp is one of my, just precious memories of seeing him. And, and there are other parts of him too, the parts that, I asked Carmen de Lavalade one time, so what would you say, you knew him out, so what would you think, like, what's the thing about Alvin when he was young? And I expected it was totally different. She said, basic thing we were always saying about Alvin is, where's Alvin? Where is he? Where is he? He was always like hiding. If you read the biography, he's hiding under the bleachers somewhere. He's back here. Lester Horton had to like pull him out to finally get him into class. Even when he was part of the company, he was always somewhere else, and they were always looking for where Alvin is. He wasn't just Alvin Ailey. Like, he grew into that. And for somebody that, joined the company when he was already Alvin Ailey, was something really wonderful for me to, demystify him and really remember that this is a human being. And so that thing still kept happening, because even as he had the company, and I have so many, funny stories from Kansas City in particular, but he hated fundraising. And so, having to ask for money and, all that. And so the question was always, where's Alvin? They would gather all these funders together, and where's Alvin? And literally one time they were having this, it was like in a YMCA or something, so there was a gym, and Alvin was hiding in the bleachers, like in the back of the bleachers, and the director of the Kansas City Friend said, Alvin, come on, we gotta go meet these people. So, this amazing man with this huge heart, but still this part of him, that was so, and I think so touchable and so relatable. And I think that was also part of the accessibility that we all felt, that somehow he was able to translate all of that and put that all on the stage, that as people, warts and all, we can still create something incredible, and so I continue to learn from Alvin to this day.
Listening to Ronni, I remember sometimes my son, when he was a little one, and he and Alvin had a wonderful relationship, and he'd sit in the theater on Alvin's lap watching the performance, and from stage at City Center, I could see them in the last row, one big head and one little head, and it looked like Alvin had two heads, and they were buddies. And then one day, Kenya was at the school, and Alvin said, hi, Kenya, how you doing? He was about 6 at that point, 6 or 7, and Kenya didn't speak. So he said, Sylvia, what's wrong with Kenya? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I said hello to him, he didn't speak. I said, well, that's unusual. I have to talk to him. That's rude. So I asked him, I said, Kenya, Alvin said hello to you. What's happened? You didn't speak to him. He said, Ma, his name is on everything. But he got over it after that. But that was a shock to him. His buddy was just
story.
everywhere.
One thing is, I'm sorry. One thing is, one day we were at a big party for Alvin in this city. And then Alvin said, Chaya, come on. No, you're in the middle of this party for you. And where are you going to? Oh, this is a small company. They wanted to show us at dance. So, no, Alvin, we cannot live here. No, come on. So we go to this studio, did the young girls, and did the yellow section from Revelation. But balletic. But contraction. But Alvin applause, and then okay, let's go back to the party. And he just sneak out like that. It's just so supporting these young kids.
Sounds like my kind of guy. I want to ask you a question about how you teach his dances. He said he had no technique. He said it so many times it made it completely unreliable as a truth. But he loved to set dances directly onto the dancers. Would you talk about what that's like and how you understand what he meant by that?
Well, he had a hybrid vocabulary. The basic technique he had was Horton technique. But when he came to New York, he studied everything. He studied Graham technique. He studied classical ballet with Carl Shook. He took everything. He studied Indian dance at the New Dance Group. At the New Dance Group, everything was going on. And
Would you explain what that is, Ms. Waters, the New Dance Group?
Oh, the New Dance Group was a studio on West 47th Street that had an incredible roster of artists teaching there. And they were also very activist during the 40s and the 50s. They were activists politically. And out of this movement came these wonderful, wonderful dancers and teachers. And so by the time I started studying there in the late 50s, middle 50s, there were people like Hadassah who taught Indian dance. And at that point, even Carmen de Lavalade was teaching, Jeffrey Holder, Charles Weidman, and the list is endless. And the students from the High School of Performing Arts would come there after school. So I was dancing with Elliot Feld and, all these great dancers. It was a wonderful, wonderful atmosphere, including Alvin. And I would see Alvin's rehearsals of Revelations when he did it, and Blues Suite, and he used live music all the time. So the atmosphere there was just electric. And as Alvin developed his technique, which is not a technique, he used things from classical ballet, he used things from Graham, he used things from Horton, he used things from jazz, Jack Cole, he used things from West African dance. He combined all of these movements. That's why I call it a hybrid technique. And he he based his school really on that ideology, is that the dancers would study classical ballet, would study the modern disciplines, both Graham and Horton and sometimes Humphrey Weidman, which was rare, would study West African dance, would study all of these. He wanted what he eventually called the total dancer. And that would have this articulation in the feet and legs and this torso that could move, And he loved an arabesque, believe me. He loved an arabesque. That was very important to him as well. So when he taught, when I first joined the company, he actually demonstrated a lot of the movement, but there were several choreographers that contributed to the repertoire at that time. And then there was Tally Beatty, wow. And there was Louis Johnson and Alvin Ailey and sometimes Judy, if she knew the ballets, or whoever was there who knew the ballets would transfer the steps, and Alvin would, see the finished product. And I never really heard him talk about Revelations until we did maybe a lecture demonstration in Chicago while we were behind the curtain waiting for it to start, and he was introducing the piece, and he talked about, I've been buked, and didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? We said, oh, really? That's what that means? But he never told us, yes. So, but he would work directly with you. And if he liked the way you did something that perhaps was somewhat of an embellishment upon what he did, but if it worked for you, he said, yes, I like that. Do that. That's how this movement evolved many times, especially when he was choreographing. I remember when we choreographed Streams before we went to Russia, and Miguel Gadreau, a lot of the parts were set on him, and on Mari Kajiwara, and on Judy, and so he was very direct, and he used imagery. He used wonderful, wonderful imagery. So no matter how abstract the ballet might be, it wasn't necessarily a narrative ballet, you were always a human being. You were always a person. And one of his most beautiful images when he talked about the hand reaching as though you're trying to touch something or touch someone. Yeah, so that brought out a kind of an extension of who you were and what you were doing. Yeah, so he was very direct with you in that way.
Thank you.
He likes school. He loved the school. He come to that 8 o'clock in the morning, and he leave the last person to leave the building. And then meanwhile, sometimes, Chaya, come on, what do you think of that dancer? Or, go to other studio and what do you think? And, he always, yeah, that's good, but, I'm saying, no, yeah, he's going to be good, or she's going to be beautiful. Look at that extension. And also that the music of that building, we had a class for, I cannot blind, what's it?
Yes, the visually impaired.
Pair,
Visually
class. And then one day they learned the Bucht.
Oh, yeah,
And then,
I taught them that.
yeah, then we're going to show to Alvin, but somehow didn't happen. That was made me so, I actually
Yeah, I
cried
was
for me.
very upset about that.
Yeah.
It wasn't allowed to be shown. That's a whole nother story.
But it was a beautiful, this dancers, it's a beautiful.
And creating imagery for them was really a challenge, but it was a beautiful challenge. And they just ate it up. They just went with it, and they did it. It was amazing, amazing.
Thank you. I want to ask a question about, I'm always intrigued by the fact that people say that they don't see his dances except for, say, Masakela Langage or Survivors or Opus McShan. They don't really see the work as political. And yet, there's numerous instances of him saying, if I'm on stage dancing, it's political. How do you understand political, or do you see it showing up in different ways, if you think it does, in what he did? And this is maybe not just the choreography, but maybe it's also the company. Maybe it has to do with the way he insisted on making it a repertory company, which you mentioned. Yeah, I would like to have an official word on that.
Well, I was in the first production of Masakela Langage. And when he was teaching that, this was the height of the civil rights movement. So in lieu of marching, we were dancing. And Alvin described he said, this could be any place. This could be Harlem, this could be South Chicago, this could be Watts, this could be South Africa. That's when we first learned what a shabim was, before I'd ever actually seen one. And as he continued to work on the ballet, we premiered it at Connecticut College, and with no costumes, just leotards and tights and stools. That was it. And then later, when we premiered it at the Brooklyn Academy, there were the couches, the rattan furniture, the chandeliers, the jukebox, and this assemblage of characters, which he told you. One day I asked him, I said, well, who am I in this? He said, you're a school teacher. I said, okay. And I took that as a very serious responsibility. That was one of the roles I learned. And it being during the civil rights, it was like an outcry, an outrage, the outrage you felt about what was going on in various places, in most places in the United States and in the world. And again, it was this dance language, really our first language, before there was any verbiage, that we were using to express this. And the audience, they were shocked after the first performance. I mean, this was a commission by Connecticut College, so I don't know exactly what they expected. And sitting in that audience was a young Peter Wooden, who later joined the company to learn that ballet. And the impression that he had is an indelible one. And Alvin had us speaking directly to the audiences, those people in the front rows, and getting eye contact. Now, that was scary, but, we did it. And he was very influenced by what happened to Fred Hampton, who was a Panther, Black Panther, shot in his home, in his bed, point-blank range by the police in the middle of the night. And I don't know if Alvin ever said it to anybody else, but I heard him say it many times. He said, I can't believe that could happen. I can't believe that it could happen, and yet it did. Yeah, and it just intensified his resolve to bring all of these injustices to the surface for this audience, any audience.
No, it's beautiful. I mean, because because of my English. So, but here he told me to just to use my step and you show yourself. And if I'm thinking something, I'm something upset, something wanted to do, you should use that. Use my step, even just to do that to reach, something like that. He understood that, sometimes I've just come to the school and then, or rehearse and then to end, and then I just love dancing, hanging around with him. And so I think that was my way to learn how to protest something and what my belief is.
Well, his ballets were always more than steps. That was the thing. That was the freedom, learning how to use that. And at first it was frightening and intimidating for me because most choreographers at that time, they give you the count. There was even a count for the hair. They give you a count for everything and what to do here and what to do there. But Alvin, he wanted more from you. He wanted you to bring yourself to the material. He called it subtext. Judy called it dancing from the inside out, but it was a freedom that you learned to use. And it wasn't really a freedom, it was a discipline, because he had also studied acting. And so he brought that to you. And I had never worked that way. It was scary at first. And learning backwater blues and those character parts,
I remember when I was, my first evaluation when I was with the repertory ensemble, it was with Sylvia and Alvin, and I was petrified because as Sylvia said, Alvin was really into, especially at that time, I always call it his New York City ballet phase, because long legs and high legs, and I didn't have any of that, and I did not have an arabesque.
That story.
No, not that story. That's between us. But anyway, so I was petrified, but I could dance, but I just didn't have those things. And so I was really scared when I was going to have this evaluation. I knew he was going to tell me, you need to stretch, you need to do this, you need to do that. And instead he said, you need to get out of the studio. And you need to go and read and do things and live your life and get your heart broken and blah, 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 all this stuff. And I looked at him like he was crazy. And he said, because you cannot dance about dance. You have to dance about life. And that was my mantra from then on, to really, in order to be able to dance about life, then you have to have a life, right? And you have to create a life, and you have to, do all those things and nurture yourself. And I think that insistence that he had is to me what also touches audiences, because they see real live people on the stage with all of our own foibles and predilections and all the things, but they see people. And I know when I first saw the Ailey Company, although I did not like, we heard about that already, but I also took a workshop, a master class. And I grew up in Iowa, and this was in 1972, and I think my family was one of maybe 3 to 5 black families in the city. And so I just really, and my parents were from the South, but moved north to be able to live their lives without, and be able to do stuff, right? So I didn't really have that much contact with other black people, and our families were far away, so, I'd see my family every now and then, but I just didn't have a black community. And that was okay. I mean, I made my way through that. It wasn't like I felt like I was missing anything. But the representation of black people at that time was very, either minstrelsy on TV, minstrelized, or fetishized. You just didn't really see black people. They were just not. Anyway, so when the Ailey Company came to town and I saw these people, and they were, it was like Wakanda came to Iowa. I was just like, who are these people? And they're, the cosmopolitanism was just pouring out of their pores, and you could just see but the thing about it was, because this was again the late 60s, early 70s, most of the movements, while they were very necessary, they were very angry, right? Like, my mother was always infuriated about something. We're going to go out and protest. And, so there was a lot of necessary anger, but it was still, but the Ailey Company had all this, but with joy. And there was this joy and they understood who they were in the world, and they were proud of themselves. And the thing that I did right after that was I went out and I got my hair cut in an afro. And that's when I finally began to accept myself as a Black person, and not just okay, that's a thing I am, and something that's a little bit inconvenient in Iowa, but no, this is who I am, and this is who I'm a part of. And the Ailey Company did that for me. And so I was able to see myself, and then see myself in a different way.
I have one last question. They're gonna chase us off stage, but I have to ask this question before we wrap up. And there's a performance at 7:30. So I want to know what it was like in 1989. And I'm thinking after he passes, what was it like? How many dancers were lost from the company? I think it's so important for us, and I think it's about maybe my generation, right? Who looks back and we realize we lost an entire generation of elders, and in the midst of the AIDS crisis. And 89 was such a critical moment in it, because that was the moment where the numbers just spiked in that year. And unfortunately, Mr. Ailey was a part of that. But if you would be kind enough to share just a little bit of what that must have been like, I think we would all be very grateful.
Well, in January of that year, one of the times when Alvin was in the hospital, at first I didn't see him because he was there at Lenox Hill, I think, under an assumed name. And Chaya would go see him to work on programming. And Chaya said, Sylvia, you should go. I said, well, no, I don't want to go if he doesn't want me to come there. And one day I got home, and my mother said, Sylvia, Charles Gordon called. I said, who? She said, Charles Gordon. And then I remembered, oh, yeah, I know who that is, So I made it over to the hospital, and I still didn't know what was wrong, really. No one gave it a name. And that's when he told me about the will, and also he tried to give me this piano that I said, I don't think I can take it. We're renovating a house. He would blink, and I'd say, and then he said, he showed me the treatment that hadn't been approved by the Food and Drug Administration, and I read it as clearly as I could, and the after effects were just not great. And I said, are you going to do this? And he said, well, I don't think I have a choice. I said, oh, okay. And after that time, after about a month, more than that, he was out of the hospital, and he was ready to travel in June with the company to Paris to be at the Grand Palais. And at the end of that very successful run, I mean, even Grace Jones came and sat on his lap backstage. I wish I could find that picture. And he said, you've got to do one of our galas for us. And she said, oh, of course, darling, And he was having a great time. And at the end of that run, I talked to him at his hotel, and he said, they've invited us back to be at the Palace Opera Ballet. And I can do any rep I want. I can bring as many pieces as I want, because normally they want one program, so everybody sees the same thing in Paris. And so he was feeling pretty good about that, and so I was so excited. And then around in September, we had tried to get in touch with Ulysses Dove, who was incommunicado for a moment. And then after that, Alvin went into the hospital again for the last time. And every day was a different day. By that time, his mother was there. And she finally said, listen, people want to visit. I'm going to tell them they should visit whenever they want. And there were streams and streams and streams of people to say hello, to say goodbye. Even Martha Graham came. And lots of choreographers, lots of dancers, lots of people from theater, lots of friends. And finally, closer to his death, Ellis Hazlip, who was a board member, but he also produced the Soul Show, and he was very active with Channel 13. And he said to me, do you think Mrs. Cooper, that's Alvin's mother, would let me plan Alvin's funeral? Well, we hadn't even talked anything about that. And I said, sure, I'm sure she'd be happy for you to do that. We haven't discussed it, and I think if anyone can approach her, you can. And he did, and she said, yes, that would be fine. And then Ulysses Dove came back to America after choreographing, and he was furious that Alvin at this point was semi-conscious. And I said, well, we tried to reach you, but you were out to lunch. So, and then on December 1st, there were a few of us with him, Chaya, Judy, Mrs. Cooper, myself, and my then husband, Chauncey Jones. And we saw him take his last breath. It was peaceful. It was, I don't remember how I felt. It was just a stillness I'd never experienced before. But before he left us, I think he had put in place certain feelings, certain thoughts about certain plans, how he wanted people to go. He had talked with Judy and had taken Judy on tour, the last American tour, even though she had her own company at that point, the Jamison Project. And he had always said to me that he felt she was the designated director of the company. And I can't add much more to that. It's an indelible memory. It doesn't haunt me. I feel he was at peace. When he left, it was too early, for sure. He had a lot of ballets he still wanted to do that he talked about. I wish I could choreograph. I would pick up the mantle, but I don't.
Yes. It was a very hard time because I went to a hospital every morning, every evening. Then 8 o'clock I go there, and then God said, where are you going? Cafeteria, which is second floor, but I continue to go up to 8th floor, and the nurse knows I'm coming. And then we talked to Alvin a little bit, and then Alvin said, well, next season, New York season, please don't put my ballet. Revolution is okay, but not put my ballet. I said, no. So I go back in office and then make up, in that time 3 weeks, but I made a program. I go to his office, hospital. I show to him. He said, see, you can do it. He said, yeah, can I come back tomorrow? So I go back building and the office. I ask Bill Harmon, can I have the last year's income record? So I look at, and then, with Alvin's work day, is sold $100,000. If I know Alvin, $70,000. So I put down all the data. I took to the paper the next day to Alvin. Alvin, look at this. If we do your ballet, that much income. If we don't do your ballet, it's like this. What do you think? He said, you can do it, my ballet, just like that. And also, he asked me to make sure I have to call him before I visit. Because then I went to the hospital and I asked nurse, Miss McKnight, I said, why he always asked me to call? I said, oh, Miss Ailey always wanted to change the clothes to the street clothes instead of a hospital. Yeah, and then my tour started, and the first stop was Rome, and I called him Alvin. Rome, and we was huge success. We did 2 curtain call, and still audience didn't go. But then Alvin said, when you coming home? I said, Alvin, I just left yesterday, and I think this tour is another at least 7 weeks. But every day I call, and every day ask me, when you coming back? And then one day he said, I'm so tired. Now I couldn't figure out why he's so tired. Then I think I called you, and Sylvia said, Mrs. Cooper, Alvin's mom said, no, he's Alvin Ailey. Shouldn't be that name to Charles Gordon. Yeah, it shouldn't be that name. So it changed to Alvin Ailey. Suddenly, all the visitors, and they made him so tired, actually. Yeah. I mean, not their fault, but, that was very hard. And then after he took a last breath, and then Sylvia, Mrs. Cooper, and Judy, and Chelsea went to that other room, and the nurse Mark Knight said, what do you like to do? I said, alone? I said, yeah, can I? And she leave. What I did was start cleaning the room. I don't know, he was there, and I just clean, wipe off everything, put the things down, and then just make sure cover. And I never, that's so stupid. I was doing things. And then after that, we went to the room, and then Bill Harmon came, and that was about 20 minutes later, all the Channel 4s, they was right here, the hallway.
Yeah, they were there. We had to go out a separate exit. And one of the saddest things was his brother, Calvin, his half-brother. He was at Alvin's apartment building in the laundry room and saw it on television.
Yeah.
And he just never got over that. He said, why didn't somebody tell me? Well, we didn't know where he was. We were just dealing with the immediate. And it wasn't to exclude him from anything, but it was just that way. It was hard for him to get over.
And Sylvia was incredible. She was amazing. Then after that, we went to the Alvin's room and our apartment, and they started cleaning. She was separating this one, go to this, and then so and so, the choreographer, the gift, and she did an unbelievable job.
That was hard.
Yeah.
Well, I think what impressed me the most was Alvin's funeral, which was really an event. I mean, Ellis did himself proud. He had the cathedral staff build a stage that was appropriate, and at the wake, there were like 4,000 people at the wake, just coming. But when we went to, Paul Szilard said, well, you must have the funeral at Campbell's. I said, Campbell's is not hardly big enough for an Alvin Ailey funeral, and he should be in the community. So I thought St. John the Divine. So Ellis had me call the most very reverend, I forget his name. I didn't know he was the head of the whole church, but I called the most very reverend, and I spoke with him. He had me come up, and we started planning it from there. And, you know, Max Roach played, and many people spoke. And one radio person said, well, should we broadcast this? I mean, who knows Alvin Ailey in Iowa? I said, well, it's up to you, you know. And he missed his shot, you know. He didn't do it. And it was an amazing television event, if you want. And it was a beautiful funeral. And with Ellis, when we went to, I have to tell you, when we went to not Campbell's, but Benta's Funeral Home, which is in Harlem. And we were talking to Karen Benter, and Ellis said, now listen, Karen, you better get this right or we'll bring in our own makeup people. She said, don't worry, Ellis, don't worry, don't worry. And Mrs. Cooper was there and she said, that's right, you know. And they got it right. They got it totally right. And then we had another funeral for him in Los Angeles as well.
I just want to say you got it right, and you got it right, and you got it right. Thank you.
Some of these things are very difficult to talk about in forum and public like this, but they're also joyful. It's an expression of our joy and our love, respect, and appreciation. And Adrienne, I thank you for giving us this cathartic moment, you know.
Thank you.